Huples Cat and Wolfie Terrier. Many moons ago I was reviewing this, slowly but surely. I decided to revisit it. I'm going to restart this at some point. But let's flip to 017. Burn tree. Now this is not a show and tell, this is a talk and tell. There will be a follow-up video probably next week where I actually show burn supplies and I talk about what burn supplies would be available to you improvised in a condition of SHTF. But what does this book tell me what I need to do? My ultimate survival manual, extreme version. So first off, it says you have to understand that the body is covered by skin, and skin is the largest organ of the body, and it is. And it talks about the 3 layers of the body, which I can show you, but there's not much point. The bottom line is that even a slight burn of the top layer of the skin will be very painful because of where the nerves are. If you get burned through the skin into the muscle and beneath, you actually kill the nerve supply, so you actually won't have quite so much pain initially. But any burn on the skin will prevent the skin from doing its job. So the main problem with burns initially is temperature regulation and fluids, because fluids will pour out of the body, literally ooze out of the body or evaporate away, usually both. And you will also have bacteria and viruses getting into the body, as well as possible blood loss and all that. So a burn's a bad thing. Most people have experienced a burn, it hurts. So this book talks about 1st degree, 2nd degree and 3rd degree, and most people understand what they are. Now bearing in mind it's no longer used, there's what you call partial thickness and full thickness. So if the top 2 layers of the skin are partially removed, 1 or 2 of them, that's a partial burn, and it's treated differently from a full thickness burn where you've gone burned through into the muscle and sometimes even burned right down to the bone. Those wounds are not treatable in SHTF. All you can do is maintain sterility, try and keep them hydrated and hope they don't die from infection or from volume fluid loss or from in fact pain. The amount of painkillers that burns victims require is astronomical amounts of morphine. So unless you've got well supplied with narcotics, there's no chance that you're going to be able to alleviate the pain of a major burn. So what types of burns are there? It doesn't matter. The only one that matters is the burn that you've actually experienced. So why are burns important and why did I overlook them as one of my major preps? Because they're unpleasant to think about. When we've read about Hiroshima, we read about people's eyeballs burning and stuff like that. I don't know about you, but it makes me distinctly uncomfortable to even approach the subject. But you have to, so I am. And when Joe Primal suffered his burn, I decided I needed to actually act and get better burn stuff.
Hey guys, I hope you're having a better New Year than I am so far. Mine started a little rough. I got a cooking injury.
Now I have a ton of burns dressings and all the rest of the stuff, and I needed some creams and I needed some other stuff, and I got them. I replaced a gap. Now if I suffered, or Kitty suffered, a massive burn, partial or full burn, to my entire arm, the amount of stuff I've got probably would be insufficient. And you've seen that video, and it's a lot of stuff compared to what most people have. So what do you do if you have a burn? Well, what's the burn coming from? The majority of burns will be from boiling liquids, canning soup accidents in Joe Primal's case, or tipping fluids on yourself whilst cooking. You should never have pets around you when you're cooking, and you should be very careful and intentional about moving hot things whilst you are cooking. The other one would be house fires or garage fires or propane explosions from barbecuing and gasoline explosions from keeping gasoline and that sort of thing. Things preppers tend to do. Preppers tend to have gasoline in cans more than most people. Preppers tend to have more propane lying around than most people. Always be aware of the fact that if the gas is there, it can ignite and you're in deep serious problems. So you need to remove either the oxygen or the fuel or the ignition source. And it's almost impossible to do all 3 of those things, but it's a good idea to be thinking safety. For example, when I'm pouring gasoline into the Prius, which is rare, but when I do, what I do is I actually stand away from the gas tank opening. So I don't put the nozzle in like this, so if there's an explosion it comes like this, I stand to the side. So try and be a little bit more intentional whilst handling stuff that can explode or burn. Wood fires are a big thing. Bonfire night, November the 5th, remember the 5th of November, Every year in England, people would actually burn to death or suffer serious burns by the fireworks hitting them or the actual bonfires falling on top of them. Very dangerous thing is wood fires in large amounts, so be careful of that. But in SHTF we're going to look at burns from wildfires, we're going to look at we're going to see burns from possible nuclear explosions, we're going to see burns from cities catching fire. As with everything, the single most important treatment for a burn is not to be burned. What do you do if you get a burn? It depends on where it's from. No matter what the source of the burn is, whether it's a chemical burn, or whether it's a liquid burn, or a hot food burn, or a flash burn, remove the clothing entirely as fast as you can. This may well involve removing skin whilst you're doing this. You won't be feeling much. Get the clothing off. The clothing will retain heat and will continue to burn you after you've even cooled it in water. And that's the second thing you need to do. You need to immerse the area completely in cold, not iced water. Shock can kill. For about 5 to 10 minutes, then bring it out, wait a few minutes, and put it back in. And you need to keep that going probably for about 4 hours for a major burn. After that, you can use cold compresses and remove them and put them on and off. What you never put on a burn is an oil-based lotion. So do not put polysporin on it. It's from petroleum. And you don't want that in there. It's going to be almost impossible to get it out. The stuff I got isn't great, but it's better than nothing. But stuff like Flamazine, which is prescription only in North America, it turns out, you need to actually put that on. And you need this amount as a thick layer all over. And then you're going to remove that on a regular basis because it's going to sweat off and repair it. Because without that there, the skin will just dry out and go hard and scar. And that's why they say in this book that for 3rd degree burns you have to have skin grafts. Now I don't know about you, but I don't think skin grafts are going to happen in SHTF. So the best thing you can do is accept the fact that you're going to be horribly disabled, and that means you need to look at how you look after joints. Joints that are burned. The main thing you do is you don't keep it immobilized. You actually have proper dressings for burns that actually keep it tensed and keep it expanding, because you don't want the scarring to happen. Because you can literally lose function, especially the fingers. So you might look at getting finger splints, you might look at exercises right from the beginning. Yes, it's going to split open, yes, it's going to bleed a bit, yes, it's going to be very painful. But if you don't keep the joint flexible, the skin will literally harden into a scar around the joint and you will lose permanently function. And in SHTF, cutting this and using plastic surgery to fix the muscles ain't happening. Now, part of the good advice here, it tells you it's a good idea to remove constricting jewellery. You'll notice that at the beginning of the pandemic I removed my ring because I don't actually want viruses underneath the ring when I'm washing my hands. But any jewellery, including necklaces, you should remove immediately. They'll also be quite hot, but get all jewellery off. It recommends anti-inflammatory medications like aspirin and naproxen. I'd be really cautious with aspirin with a major burn. Mostly because of the bleeding that's going to happen, and aspirin thins blood and makes blood more likely to bleed. I'd also be careful of naproxen. That actually can be quite harsh on people's stomachs, and the major thing you need to do here with a burns victim without a hospital is to actually keep them orally hydrated. So you would actually want to give them salts and sugar and mix up your own and give them oral hydration as much as they possibly can take in. The amount of volume they will lose through a burn over a period of days is enormous. If they're not able to eat and drink, what you need to be able to do is put a thin, gentle rubber hose up their rectum with them lying on their left side and their knees drawn up, lubricated with water-based lube, and actually run fluids in, again maybe with a bit of salt and sugar though, not too much, and think about what you're doing, and hold it in there for an hour or so before you let it come out. They will absorb some fluid through the rectum. It's actually a perfectly reasonable and effective treatment to rehydrate unless you have an intravenous infusion. If you have an intravenous infusion, you want to try and put it into a vein that's going to maintain itself easily and away from the burn site if possible. The reason for the constriction of jewellery and the IV and the rest of it is that the tissue will swell. It will absolutely swell up. For example, if you have black tongue and not much evidence of anything, black tongue and black nostrils, within an hour or two, if there is a substantial burn in there, you're dead. The airway will completely occlude. They'll come in walking and talking with a bit of black stuff, going, oh my goodness, it flashed at me. and within an hour the airway will be so swollen it will die. So unless you're able to do a tracheostomy and maintain the tracheostomy, they will die in SHTF. So it's going to be very hard to do high level interventions that require 24/7 supervision in an SHTF. So most major burns will result in death in SHTF. That is one of the reasons I always recommend that preppers actually have a euthanasia policy, so you actually can provide comfortable and dignified death reasonably fast to people in SHTF, because some things are just horrible. Do you want your loved one to choke to death without any analgesia or sedation? Personally, I don't, but that's up to you. I also believe if there's a God or a gods, they would not frown upon us intervening with inevitable death to help it to be done in a nice and gentle way. That's my opinion. So there's a term called debridement, which is you remove dead skin, and you're going to have to do that quite frequently with burns victims. If they have blisters, try not to pop the blister, try and keep the blister intact because it's sterile inside the blister and it's a good healing mechanism. But you will actually have folds of skin hanging off from major burns. Get sterile or very clean scissors and gently trim away any black, any dead flesh. It's not going to help with healing, and it will interfere with regrowth of tissue in the skin. Now, one of the major things you can do for a major burn, that's where it's large scale burn that's superficial or a smaller burn that's deep, is to actually maintain core body temperature. They're going to get quite hot to touch because they're burned, so that's why you're putting them in cold water on a regular basis, not ice water, and that's why you're then going to put cold compresses on them, and when they heat up, take them off and reapply them. The reason you can do that is to try and drive the temperature down to prevent rethermal injury. The temperature is still hot inside the burned flesh and it will continue to damage other flesh around it. So that's one of the things you can do. Now, we all have, I think, as preppers, little mylar blankets, little plastic blankets. Anybody that's run or done any sport events of any endurance is usually given one at the end, and you can keep them and fold them up and reuse them. Those are actually perfectly great for encasing burns patients to transport them to burn centres, and it's often used for that. So in the SHTF condition, you might want to use a mylar blanket on a regular basis around the person to try and help them maintain their temperature. Even though they feel hot and you're immersing them in cold water, the burn area, you still want to be aware of the fact they're going to lose a lot of fluids and they're going to go into shock, volume shock, but they're also temperature control is going to be rubbish until the skin reheals. It's one of the reasons you want to keep this dressed. It's one of the reasons you want to use creams early on. Now, this is true. If you are burned down to the muscle or even down to the bone over a joint, you might want to consider early elective amputation above the area. Now, that's pretty high level stuff for a first aider, I kind of agree. But if you are thinking of society will collapse and there will be nuclear war and I'm going to try and do my best to survive, knowing how to amputate limbs very quickly and safely is an important skill. One of the major skills in the Civil War in America, the first Civil War, the first and only Civil War, is the fact that amputation speed was much more important in a doctor than anything else. Because the longer it took to saw the arm or the leg off, the more likely the person was to bleed and go into shock and die. And that's absolutely true. And that will be true in SHTF. SHTF won't be slapping an Israeli bandage on them and starting an IV and then what? If you've lost the joint, you're going to have to accept disability forever, or you need to remove it if it gets infected. So you need to know infection signs and all the rest of the stuff. So on a scale of 1 to out of 10, this is about a 2 for information that actually is any use to me whatsoever in an ultimate survival situation. Peace out. And there is little Wolfie. This has been a 2021 Wolfie production. This has been a 2021 Wolfie Terrier production.